America's nuclear plants are closing, and China is building 22 new ones, all at the same time. 22 reactors under construction simultaneously, more than every other country on Earth put together. You heard that right. But China isn't just building more nuclear plants. It's building technologies so far ahead of anything in the West that the gap may already be impossible to close. This is the story of the greatest energy power shift in modern history, and most people have no idea it's happening. Here's what they're not telling you. To understand how we got here, you first need to feel the true scale of what China has already built, because the numbers are almost hard to believe. The scale of what China is doing. Picture the entire nuclear output of the United States, France, and the United Kingdom, three of the most powerful nations on Earth, with decades of nuclear history between them combined into a single number. That is what China is building toward, not eventually, not in some distant policy document. Right now, with concrete already poured and steel already rising. Here are the numbers, and pay attention, because they only get harder to believe the further you go. China currently has 44 nuclear reactors operating on its grid. 22 more are under active construction this very moment simultaneously, across multiple sites, all moving at once. And behind those 22 sits a construction pipeline that runs all the way to 2035, fully planned, fully funded, and already permitted. When that pipeline completes, China's nuclear capacity will exceed the combined total of the United States, France, and the United Kingdom. 3 nuclear superpowers, lapped by a country that had 0 commercial reactors as recently as 1990. You heard that right. To feel what that actually means, consider France. France runs 70% of its entire national grid on nuclear power. It is considered the gold standard of nuclear energy, the country that committed hardest, built most consistently, and never looked back. China is on track to surpass France's entire lifetime of nuclear construction within the next decade. A country that the West spent 40 years calling a developing nation is about to out-nuclear the most nuclear-dependent country in the world. But here's what makes this genuinely unsettling. It's not just the scale, it's the speed. China's first commercial reactor came online in 1994. In roughly 30 years, it has gone from a beginner buying reactor blueprints from foreign firms to the dominant force in global nuclear construction. For comparison, the United States spent 40 years building its fleet and has added almost nothing to it since the 1990s. America had a 30-year head start and is now being overtaken in real time. And this is where most people make a critical mistake in how they think about China's program. They assume it must be reckless, that the speed must come at the cost of safety, or quality, or engineering rigor, that somewhere in those 5-year build timelines, there must be a corner being cut. That assumption is wrong, and understanding exactly why it's wrong is the most important part of this entire story. But before you can understand how China builds so fast, you need to understand why America stopped building at all. America's nuclear retreat. At its peak, America had the most powerful nuclear fleet ever assembled. 104 operating reactors, producing nearly 20% of the country's electricity reliably, cleanly, and cheaply, year after year after year. These weren't new plants carrying debt. Most of them were fully paid off. They had decades of operational life still ahead of them. By every rational measure, they were national assets that should have been protected at almost any cost. So what happened? The first blow didn't come from a protest. It didn't come from a disaster. It came from a gas well in Pennsylvania. When the fracking revolution hit America around 2008, it flooded the energy market with cheap natural gas practically overnight. Suddenly, gas plants that could be built in 2 years for a fraction of the cost were undercutting nuclear on price in the wholesale electricity market. And here's the brutal reality of how that market works. It rewards the cheapest electricity produced at any given moment. It does not reward reliability. It does not reward the fact that your plant runs 365 days a year without interruption. It rewards cheap. And nuclear, with its enormous fixed operating costs that run whether the plant produces power or not, couldn't win that fight. Plants started closing, not because they were unsafe, not because they were broken, because the spreadsheet said close. Kewaunee in Wisconsin shut down in 2013, a plant with a license running until 2033. Vermont Yankee followed in 2014. Oyster Creek in 2019. Each one the same story. A fully functioning reactor, decades of life remaining, shut down because cheap gas made it economically impossible to keep the lights on and the balance sheet clean at the same time. But the economics were only half the problem. The other half lived in the American public's memory. 3 Mile Island in 1979 didn't kill a single person. The scientific consensus on its actual health impact is remarkably clear. The radiation released was too low to cause measurable harm to the surrounding population. But what it did do was install a fear in the American psyche that no amount of data has ever fully dislodged. Then Chernobyl in 1986 refreshed it. Then Fukushima in 2011 hit like a third wave. No other energy source carries this psychological weight. A gas plant explosion that kills workers doesn't stop gas plant construction. An oil refinery fire doesn't trigger a national conversation about whether oil is too dangerous to use. But a nuclear incident anywhere in the world, even one with a fundamentally different reactor design in a different country under completely different conditions, reshapes nuclear policy everywhere. That is the unique burden that nuclear carries, and America never found a way to put it down. The regulatory environment that fear produces made everything worse. After Fukushima, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission mandated expensive safety upgrades across the U.S. fleet. For plants already struggling to compete with cheap gas, this was the final calculation. Spend hundreds of millions on upgrades for a plant that's barely breaking even, or close it. One by one, they chose to close. America now operates 93 reactors, down from 104. More closures are already scheduled. And here is where the story gets truly dark, because losing the plants was bad enough, but what America lost alongside them is something far harder to get back. Why America can't build any more. 2 new nuclear reactors, that is all America has built in the last 30 years. 2. In a country of 330 million people, with the largest economy on Earth and a nuclear engineering tradition stretching back to the Manhattan Project, 2 reactors in 3 decades. Those 2 reactors are Vogtle Units 3 and 4 in the state of Georgia. And their story is so catastrophic that it didn't just fail on its own terms, it poisoned the well for every nuclear project that might have come after. Here's what was supposed to happen. Vogtle 3 and 4 were budgeted at approximately $14 billion. They were supposed to come online between 2016 and 2017. Clean, modern, third-generation reactors that would prove America could still build nuclear at scale. A flagship moment for an industry that desperately needed one. Here's what actually happened. The final cost crossed $35 billion. The reactors didn't come online until 2023 and 2024, nearly a decade late. The primary contractor, Westinghouse, went bankrupt midway through construction. Ratepayers in Georgia were handed the bill through regulated utility agreements that gave them no choice in the matter. But here is the most important question, and it's the one nobody wants to answer honestly. Why? Why did a country that built over 100 reactors in the 20th century suddenly find itself incapable of building 2 in the 21st? The answer is 3 compounding disasters that fed into each other. First, the workforce disappeared. Nuclear construction in America stopped so completely for so long that the skilled trades who knew how to build these plants simply aged out. The welders, the pipe fitters, the nuclear construction engineers who carried 30 years of hands-on knowledge. They retired. They moved into other industries. And crucially, they were never replaced because there was nothing to replace them for. Vogtle had to rebuild that workforce from scratch on an active job site while the clock was running and the budget was bleeding. Second, the supply chain collapsed. The specialized components that go into a nuclear reactor, reactor pressure vessels, steam generators, heavy forgings, used to be manufactured in America. They aren't anymore. By the time Vogtle needed them, They had to be sourced from Japan and South Korea, with all the lead times, import complexity, and single-point vulnerabilities that entails. One delayed shipment from overseas didn't just slow one task, it cascaded through the entire construction schedule. Third, and this is the one that cuts deepest, every American nuclear project is built exactly once. There is no standard design that gets repeated. No construction crew that has done this before moving on to do it again. No supplier who has made this exact component for the last 5 projects. Every build starts from zero. Every problem is a new problem. There is no learning curve because there is nothing to learn from. When Vogtle became the benchmark, the economic verdict on American nuclear construction was essentially written. No private utility will touch it without guaranteed cost recovery and federal backstops. And while America was learning that lesson the hard way, China had already figured out the solution and had been executing it for years. The engineering story behind China's speed. China did not build 22 reactors simultaneously by working harder. It did not get to 5-year construction timelines through sheer willpower or by ignoring the complexity of what it was building. It got there by solving a problem that America never even identified as a problem. The problem was this. Every Western nuclear project treated each reactor as a unique, one-time engineering challenge. China looked at that approach and made a different decision. It chose 2 reactor designs, the domestically developed Hualong-1 and the American-designed AP1000 licensed from Westinghouse, and it locked them in. Same blueprints, same specifications, same components list, same construction sequence, site after site after site. That single decision changed everything downstream. Think about what standardization actually means when you apply it to something as complex as a nuclear reactor. The first time you build a Hualong-1, you encounter problems. You solve them. You document everything. The second time, you encounter fewer problems because you already solved the ones from the first build. By the 5th time, your crew has done this before. By the 10th, they are executing a known sequence with precision that no first-time builder can match. By the time you are building reactor number 20, you are operating something close to an assembly line, not in the sense that you are rushing, but in the sense that every step is understood. Every timeline is predictable, and every risk has already been identified and mitigated somewhere earlier in the program. This is the compounding power of repetition applied to complex construction, and it is the one thing that American nuclear projects, each one bespoke and one-off, have never been able to access. Walk through what this means on the ground. The same construction crews move from one completed reactor to the next. They are not learning on the job, they have done this before, on this design, with these specifications. Suppliers are manufacturing the same components repeatedly, which means their quality control improves, their production timelines tighten, and their costs fall with every unit they produce. Project managers are not solving novel problems under budget pressure. They are executing a known sequence against a predictable schedule. The uncertainty that kills Western nuclear budgets simply does not accumulate in the same way. The timeline result of this approach is almost difficult to state without it sounding like an exaggeration. A typical nuclear project in the United States or Europe, from groundbreaking to grid connection, takes 15 to 20 years. Hinkley Point C in the United Kingdom, currently under construction, is tracking towards 17 years or more at a cost of roughly $40 billion for 2 reactors. A standard Chinese Hualong-1 build takes approximately 5 to 6 years, same generation of technology, fundamentally different outcome. But the standardization story is only half of it. The other half is the supply chain, and this is where China's decade-long infrastructure investment pays off in ways that are almost invisible from the outside. Every major component in a Chinese nuclear reactor is manufactured domestically. Reactor pressure vessels, steam generators, turbine islands, control systems, specialized forgings that in America must be sourced from Japan with months of lead time in China. They are ordered from a domestic manufacturer who has made that exact component before and will make it again for the next project already in the pipeline. There are no import delays. There are no foreign supplier negotiations. There is no single overseas factory whose schedule can derail an entire national construction program. The cost outcome of all of this is stark. Chinese nuclear construction runs somewhere between $2,500 and $3,500 per kilowatt of installed capacity. American and European equivalents land between $8,000 and $15,000 per kilowatt. That is not a marginal efficiency gap that better project management could close. That is a structural cost difference that makes nuclear energy economically competitive inside China and economically catastrophic in America under any realistic set of conditions. And underneath all of it sits the workforce unbroken, continuously employed, accumulating knowledge since the 1990s. China never demobilized its nuclear construction industry. It never let that chain of institutional knowledge break. America did. And you are about to see exactly what that decision cost. The 3 technologies that change everything. Everything you have heard so far, the 22 simultaneous builds, the 5-year timelines, the standardized designs, the domestic supply chains, that is the conservative part of China's nuclear program. That is the part you can see on a satellite image. That is the part that by itself already represents the largest nuclear construction effort in human history. But there is another part, and it is the part that should genuinely unsettle anyone who assumes the West still leads in nuclear technology. Because China is not just building more of the same reactors the world has always built. It is simultaneously developing the next 3 generations of nuclear power in commercial operation right now, while the West is still arguing about whether the current generation is worth the trouble. 3 technologies, each one more extraordinary than the last. The first is the thorium molten salt reactor, operating in the Gobi Desert in Wuwei in Gansu Province. And to understand why this matters, you need to know a piece of history that the American nuclear establishment would rather forget. In the 1960s, scientists at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee built a working molten salt reactor and ran it for 5 years. It worked. It was stable. It produced heat without the enormous pressures that make conventional reactors dangerous. And then in 1972, the program was canceled, not because it failed, but because it didn't produce the plutonium that weapons programs needed. The technology was shelved. The research was filed away. And for 50 years, molten salt reactors existed mostly in academic papers and the dreams of nuclear engineers who knew what had been abandoned. China found those papers, and then China built the reactor. The world's first commercial thorium molten salt reactor has achieved criticality and entered demonstration operation in China. Here is what makes it different from every conventional reactor you have ever heard of. It runs on thorium, an element 3 to 4 times more abundant in the Earth's crust than uranium. It operates at atmospheric pressure, which removes the core mechanism that drives the kind of containment failures that turn nuclear incidents into nuclear disasters. And the waste it produces has a radioactive half-life measured in hundreds of years, not the tens of thousands of years that make spent nuclear fuel the unresolved liability sitting at the bottom of every Western nuclear cost. Calculation. The West is still holding conferences about whether molten salt reactors are theoretically viable. China is running one. But that was just the beginning. The second technology is Linglong 1, and it represents the death of an argument that Western nuclear advocates have been losing for a decade. Small modular reactors, or SMRs, have been the great promise of Western nuclear's future. Smaller, cheaper, factory-built, deployable in locations where conventional reactors simply cannot go. The logic was compelling. The delivery was not. NuScale in the United States spent 15 years and billions of dollars developing an SMR design, received regulatory certification after an exhausting approval process, lined up customers, and then canceled its first project in 2023 because the economics collapsed before a single rod of steel went in the ground. China did not wait for the economics argument to resolve itself. It built one. Linglong 1, on Hainan Island, rated at 125 megawatts, entered commercial operation, making it the first grid-connected small modular reactor in human history. The argument that SMRs are perpetually 10 years away just ran into a working reactor producing electricity for real customers. And once a design is proven and operational, the standardization logic you already understand applies immediately. What China builds once, it builds again. Then came the most extraordinary technology of all. The third is the CFR 600 fast neutron reactor, currently in advanced commissioning. And this one doesn't just change how China produces nuclear energy. It changes the entire moral and economic calculus of nuclear power itself. The deepest problem with conventional nuclear has never really been accidents. It has been the waste. Spent nuclear fuel remains dangerously radioactive for tens of thousands of years. No country on Earth has a permanent geological disposal solution running at scale. It is the liability that haunts every nuclear investment decision and hands opponents their most powerful argument. A fast neutron reactor burns existing spent nuclear fuel as its primary fuel source. The waste stockpiles that Western countries have been storing in cooling pools for decades, the spent fuel rods sitting in temporary facilities because no permanent solution exists are, from China's perspective, a future fuel reserve. 3 technologies, running in parallel, not sequenced, not theoretical operational. Thorium reactors eliminating long-lived waste, commercial SMRs, proving flexible deployment works, fast neutron reactors closing the waste cycle entirely. And when you put all 3 together, you begin to understand what China is actually building, which is something far larger than an energy program. The energy dominance endgame. Here is what China is actually building. Not just a power grid, an untouchable one. Nuclear baseload is the only major energy source on Earth with no dependence on a fuel that can be sanctioned, embargoed, or held hostage by a foreign government. Oil can be cut off. America proved that in 1973, and Russia proved it to Europe in 2022. Gas pipelines can be weaponized overnight. Coal prices move with global markets. But uranium stockpiles are domestic. Reactor fuel costs represent a fraction of total operating costs. And once a nuclear plant is built and running, no foreign policy crisis can threaten the electricity it produces. Now combine that with 430 gigawatts of annual renewable capacity addition, the largest renewable build-out in the history of civilization, and you begin to see the full architecture. China is constructing an energy system with no external pressure point. No oil shock disrupts it. No sanctions regime slows it. No hostile navy blockading a shipping lane touches it. The lights stay on, regardless of what happens in the rest of the world. But the most consequential part of this story isn't what it means for China domestically. It's what it means for everyone else. China is not building nuclear technology in isolation. It is building it as an exportable product, and it is already selling. The Hulong 1 reactor is under construction in Pakistan and Argentina, and under active negotiation across Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. When a developing nation decides it wants base-load electricity, the foundation on which every industrialized economy is built, China can now offer the complete package. The reactor design, the construction workforce, the state financing, the fuel supply, and the trained operating personnel to run it for decades. The West cannot make that offer. Westinghouse went bankrupt. Areva in France was restructured under state control. The construction capability doesn't exist at scale. The financing isn't there. The supply chain is gone. The country that controls the full nuclear supply chain by 2035 will write the energy rules for the second half of this century. The same way American oil companies defined the 20th century's energy architecture, and American technology companies defined its information architecture, whoever owns the reactor designs, the construction expertise, and the fuel cycle technology owns the infrastructure of the developing world for the next 100 years. One country has 22 reactors in the ground right now to prove it already knows that. The only question left is whether the other one figures it out before the window closes, and that window is closing faster than almost anyone in the West is willing to admit.